Hello everyone, and welcome to the first session of Coping Well During COVID, Managing Wellbeing. So it's so nice to see so many of you have joined us today for the webinar, and we're really excited to be able to offer this to you today, and we really hope that you find this webinar useful. So as I said, my name is Emily Gardner and I'm an accredited cognitive behavioural therapist. And I've worked as a mental health professional for over 11 years, having been trained to deliver specialised therapy for adults with anxiety and depression. So before we get started, it'll be quite helpful for you to know how the Q&A function works, as we're going to be using this throughout today's webinar to make it as interactive as possible. So if you start by looking up to your top right hand corner of your page and click on the box with the question mark for Q&A, and then it gives you the option to enter your name or click on the small arrow, or preferably click on the blue arrow to remain anonymous. That way we can keep your information confidential. And then throughout the webinar, you can use this to enter your question, or to answer a question, or respond to a poll. So we're going to do different things throughout the webinar, so use this function for this. So just remember though that everything that you write may not be published immediately because it needs to be approved by a moderator. So it may take a few minutes to appear. And if you do wish your question to remain private for the moderators only, then please put private at the beginning of your question or comment. And we will be unlikely to answer all questions, but your responses and engagement will help us to tailor future webinars. So let's give it a go and try it out. It'll be really helpful for us to know why you're here. Some of you may be here for yourself, some of you may be here to learn more about support available for family members or friends who might be struggling, or you might be here as a professional. Please tell us using the Q&A function. So if you go over there now and then choose an option, and you do this by liking the relevant option. So if you like the one that fits you now, and we'll come back to this in a few moments and we'll learn a bit more about who you're here. So a little bit about what we're offering. We are very well aware how difficult the last year has been, and we have never been through anything like this before. And so we've designed these webinars to help you cope with the impact caused by the coronavirus. And the theme of these webinars will be different each week, focusing on the different ways that COVID-19 might be impacting on your mental health. And the first step in each of these webinars is understanding why your mood may be impacted, followed by some really useful strategies and techniques to help you to manage the way that you feel. So let's see your responses. Who are you here for today? So I'm going to come and have a look at the Q&A now and see what you have put. Okay, so I can see that most of you are actually here for yourself. So most of you have liked that option. And some of you are also here for family members and friends who are also struggling. Lovely. Another question for you now. So what do you hope to get out of this webinar? So just have a think for a moment about why you're here and what is it you hope to gain from being here today? What do you want to learn? And I'll come back to your responses in a few moments. So this series of webinars is designed to provide you with a toolkit, essentially, of evidence-based ideas, resources and tools. And the idea is that those resources and tools will help you to manage and cope a bit better over the next few weeks and months. And the content of these webinars is based on cognitive behavioural therapy, which is a very effective treatment for depression and anxiety, which focuses on making changes to our thought processes as well as our behaviour to improve the way that we feel. Today's webinar, we're going to be looking at 2 common vicious cycles that will feel particularly relevant at this time. So we're going to be looking at an anxiety and fear cycle, as well as a low mood cycle. And then we're going to spend some time on a couple of ideas and tips to break into those vicious cycles, with the hopes that it will help you to improve the way that you feel. So let's have a look at your responses and see what you hope to gain from the webinar today. Okay, so it's been a strange year and I feel more anxious, although I'm not an anxious person, and looking for strategies to help me understand why I feel unaligned with myself. Brilliant. So some strategies to help with that new anxiety that you've not felt before. To find tools to help others to cope. Lovely. And this is one of the things that we will find, is that, you know, we're not going to be the only ones struggling. Other people are going to be struggling as well. And so it can be really helpful to have those strategies and tools, not only for ourselves, but also to help the ones we love and care about. A better understanding about how I'm going to cope when coming out of lockdown. Absolutely. So it may have been that we were worried about going into it in the past, but now we're worried about what it's going to be like coming out. How are things going to be different? To support my team of 20 people, absolutely. You know, what can we do to support others who are really struggling at this time? To be able to manage and cope with my day-to-day stress factors, support techniques to how to deal with the stress and anxiety of the past year. Absolutely, it's been building. And what we might find is that we're really burnt out and exhausted by the amount of stress and anxiety and fatigue that we're feeling. You know, it's been a long time to be going through this, and yeah, we might be at that stage where we're just feeling a bit burnt out by it all. Understanding feelings about COVID and getting back to normality, and the irrational fear of travelling and being around people in small spaces. Absolutely. Okay, I mean, there's quite a few more. Have a look through. I'll move on now for the webinar, but some really great things that you're seeking, and we are looking to cover a lot of these things, so stay tuned. Okay, another question for you. I just want you to have a think about what you are finding the most difficult about all of this. What has been the hardest thing? What's been one of the most challenging things that you faced or are currently facing? And add those to the chat function, and then I'll come back to your responses in a few moments. I just want to highlight that it has been an incredibly difficult year, and we have never been through anything like this before. So it is understandable that this pandemic is bringing up a roller coaster of emotions, and things will feel uncertain, especially as things are about to change all over again, or we're going to have that transition of coming out of lockdown, and things do feel unpredictable, and we may feel like we have very little control over things. So we may feel more scared or more anxious than usual. We may find that we're worrying a lot more about things. Perhaps we're feeling irritable or angry with people, and that's not our usual character. It's not something that we usually find ourselves doing. You may feel fine one moment and overwhelmed the next. It's important to recognise that emotions like these are normal and to be expected. We've all had to make so many changes to prevent the spread of this virus. Staying in isolation, social distancing, changes to our work, closing schools and social gatherings. A lot of us haven't seen our loved ones for over a year. We've been working remotely for over a year, and those things are going to have an impact on the way we feel, and absolutely they've been necessary for our physical health, but they do have an unfortunate impact on our mental health. We may also find that we're under increased financial pressure because of these changes, and we may find ourselves more anxious and worried about the future financially. And we might have a lot on our minds, and that might be leading us to feel quite low in mood and feeling quite down. And we may feel really frustrated, hopeless, or even helpless. And so some of you might be struggling right now and feel like you have nowhere to turn. And whilst this webinar is intended to be educational, we also wanted you to know where you can turn if you need immediate support. So if you're having thoughts of suicide or of harming yourself, please seek help. It's important to talk to someone about it. Don't struggle alone. The Samaritans are here at any time of day or night, and you can talk to them about anything that's troubling you, no matter what it is. And you can call them for free on 116 123. And you will find more information about getting further support at the end of this webinar. And you can also find this information and further information in the Q&A chat. It's the first published announcement at the beginning, so if you scroll up, you'll find this information there. So if you need it at any point, it's there for you. Okay, so what are you finding the most difficult? So I'm going to come now to your responses and see what you've said. Being able to stay focused and think positively. Yeah, and I think, you know, initially that might have been easier, but it's been going on for so long that it's hard to continue that positivity. It's hard to keep that going. Blurring of boundaries between work, study and home life. Absolutely. You know, it's been, you know, working from home, it's hard to kind of get those boundaries in place, and it starts to all merge, and you know, we don't feel like we have any escape from any of it, and we don't necessarily feel we're being productive at all in any of it. So yeah, that one's a challenge. Isolation, absolutely. It's been tough not seeing our friends and loved ones for so long. It's very isolating. Work from home, seeing no end in sight despite the vaccination. Absolutely. So, you know, it's bringing a lot of hope, but obviously we're still having to stick with the restrictions and not see everyone. Not wanting to see anyone, been enjoying my solitude too much, don't have any motivation to meet anyone. And this is natural as well. You know, we've kind of got used to living in isolation. Obviously, there are downsides to that, but for some of us, there may be positives, and actually coming out of it is making us feel anxious and worried as well. Trying to work from home and homeschool my children whilst trying to separate work and home life. Absolutely, what a challenge. And you have to remember that, you know, none of us are teachers, and you know, it's a challenge. Trying to manage and juggle it all. Work-life balance and taking breaks, can work through the whole day without moving from laptop, resulted in back problems that are now long-term. Yeah, we have to be careful. You know, our computer setup can have an impact on us, and we do need to take breaks. And we do talk a bit more about that in our working from home webinar. So a couple of you've mentioned work-life balance, working from home. And we do cover quite a few of these things on our working from home webinar. So keep an eye out for that one in the next few weeks. Okay, again, I can see more, and I would love to continue reading through them if we had a bit more time. But do have a read through, and if any of them resonate with you, then like and click the thumbs up button. And yeah, kind of share with each other. But it has been a struggle. It's been a really tough year. Longer than any of us expected. Okay, so I want to talk first a bit about a fear cycle, and this is quite a common cycle that many of you may have experienced over the last year at different points, and naturally will impact the way that we feel. So it can be really helpful to break it down to understand what's going on, and so we call this well, normally a 5 areas model, but I've just kept 4 areas just to keep it simple. And this cycle is a common cycle that many of you may have already been experiencing at times over the past year. So initially you may have been worried about catching the virus and perhaps worrying about your loved ones getting it. But then over time, your thoughts may have evolved to worrying about the future and the impact this time is having on your children, particularly if you've been homeschooling them. So you may be worrying also about the state of the world and how things will change in the future. All of these thoughts are quite distressing and they have a knock-on effect on how we feel. Of course, if we're worrying that there's going to be a serious impact on our children's future, we're going to feel scared and fearful about what that means. So it's understandable if we're having thoughts like this that we would feel fearful and scared. And then the way that we feel has a knock-on effect onto what we do. So we may find that we're spending a lot more time worrying, and it's almost like it has a snowball effect in that one worry snowballs into lots of different worries. And you may find yourself monitoring your body for symptoms, keeping an eye on how things are. Maybe you're starting to feel anxious about what your symptoms mean. Maybe you're checking the news more regularly than you would normally and starting to feel anxious or down about that. And maybe to help you cope with the challenges, you're finding that you're drinking more alcohol as a result. But it's important to be aware that our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviours also impact how we feel physically. So we may notice that you feel more hot or sweaty than usual, or perhaps your heart's racing a lot more. You may find that you're being more restless and finding it difficult to sleep at night. So on the whole, this cycle ends up leaving us feeling really overwhelmed, and it can feel really difficult to break this cycle as it escalates, and it kind of can feel like it starts to spin out of control, and we can start to feel really overwhelmed by this feeling of fear and anxiety and dread. So unfortunately, we cannot directly change how we feel in terms of our emotions, because it's a natural reaction, it's a natural consequence to what we're going through and to the thoughts that we're having about our particular situation. So we cannot change how we feel directly. So you can't just say, oh, stop feeling scared. People may have said that to you. Don't worry about it, or, don't be scared, but you can't just turn it off. So what we need to do is to make changes to how we respond. So the things that we spend our time doing can have a knock-on effect on how we feel. So in this example, spending lots of time worrying is causing a lot of distress for this individual. So in order to break this cycle, we can reduce the amount of time we spend worrying, which is easier said than done, especially if you've been a worrier for a very long time. It becomes a habit to worry, and it's something that we're quite used to doing. But the first step is being aware that that process isn't helpful. So I just want you to remember that we cannot control how we feel, but we can control how we respond. And I'm going to talk to you a bit more about how we do that now. So before we start thinking about how to break that cycle and reduce worry, let's find out how worry impacts your mood. So this is an experiment for you to try later. I want you to start by noticing your mood and rating it out of 10, 0 being the least anxious you have ever felt to 10 being the most anxious that you have felt. And then allowing yourself to worry about something, and it can be anything, for 2 minutes. Set a timer if it helps you. And then after those 2 minutes are up, reassess. Ask yourself, is it helping? How do I feel now? And then re-rate your mood again out of 10 and consider the difference. How did worrying impact your mood? And this experiment can be quite helpful to help us assess how useful worry actually is. Because if we feel that worry is useful, why would we stop? And sometimes we need to experiment with it and find out for ourselves if that process of worrying is actually useful to us. So have a go at this later and see for yourself whether worrying is helpful or not. Okay, so I want you to have a think about some of the things that you've been concerned and worried about in the last couple of weeks. So just think, okay, what is it that has been making me feel anxious? What am I afraid of? What am I worried about? And if you could add those to the Q&A, I'll come back to those in a few moments. So we're on to our strategy for fear and anxiety. So what do we do with worry? So first of all, we need to understand what we are worrying about and what kind of worries that we're having. And it's important to kind of realise that the world around us is made up of two different factors: the things we can control and the things that we can't control. And everything falls into these two categories. So we have worries that we can do something about and worries that we can't do something about. And there is a third category which falls slightly in between, and it's called our circle of influence. And this is where we can influence a lot of different aspects of our lives, but not everything. And it's important to understand the difference between what we can control and what we can influence. So to control something means that we have complete authority over it. There's no ambiguity in control. If we can control it, then we can get exactly what we want. But influencing means that we can impact it, but we can't always guarantee the results that we want. And that's an important distinction to make. So coming back to the area that's outside of our control, we do spend a lot of time worrying about things that we have absolutely no control over. And these are things that we can't change. So things like the weather, the past, lockdown restrictions, whether they've been put in place or whether they're coming to an end. It's not something we can control. Well, most of us anyway. Decisions made by our managers or organisations that we work for. Much of that we have absolutely no control over, but it does impact us. The problem is that if we spend a lot of time worrying about these things, what we're doing is causing ourselves a lot of frustration, anger and sadness, because we can't actually change most of it or any of it. And it's important to recognise here that we can't change what's already happened. So when it comes to worrying about the past, all it's doing is making us feel angry or disappointed or frustrated because it's already happened. And it may be that you're dwelling on things that have already happened that were really difficult for you. And maybe you had to make decisions during this last year that you're now suffering from the impact now, and that can be really difficult to sit with and to experience. And these thoughts are natural and understandable, but it's important to remember that sometimes some of these decisions were made at the time as in the best way that we could. We made the best choice we could given the situation we were in, and you can't change what has already happened. That will only lead you to feeling guilty and angry. Okay, so coming on to the circle of influence, and this again, as I said, is an area where we can make changes or influence outcomes, but the impact is minimal and it might not actually change anything at all. So some examples of this are recycling. You know, we can do our recycling, you know, advocate to others to recycle, but if we're the only ones that are actually recycling things, that's not going to make a big difference in the grand scheme of things. It's the same with voting. You know, we can encourage people to vote for the party we agree with or for the things we're passionate about, but if we're the only one, that won't change anything. The same with changing other people. We can influence and encourage, and we can talk to them and discuss the benefits, but we can't make people do things. Another area that's within our circle of influence is our own health. You know, of course, we can look after our health as best as we can. We can do everything we can. We can follow the restrictions, we can follow guidelines, we can eat healthy, we can exercise, but we can't guarantee that we will be healthy for our whole lives. We can only do our best. So, of course, what we do in each of these areas is really important, but we don't have complete control. There are other factors at play. So if we spend a lot of time dwelling on these things that are beyond our control, beyond our influence, then we can be left feeling really frustrated and angry that things are not changing. And the final area is our circle of control. And it can be more helpful to focus on those things that we do have control over. And those things are our actions. So what we choose to do, who we choose to vote for, what we choose to spend our time doing, our self-talk, so the messages we tell ourselves, and what we focus our time and energy on as well. So let's come back to some of your concerns and worries that you've been having. I'm going to have a look at those now. Okay, so possible reaction to vaccination booked for next week. So you might be feeling worried about that. Serious health concerns with older family members, struggling to get them to help and care, the help and care they need during the pandemic. Absolutely. I've been shielding, so I'm worried about going back to face-to-face contacts with families, but I'm also worried about letting my colleagues down as they've been doing the work that I've been unable to do. Absolutely. So kind of worried about kind of coming out of shielding, getting back to normal, and the impact that's going to have. Not learning enough during my studies because the school has been closed for months. Absolutely. Must be, you know, anxiety provoking. And as kind of we think about the 3 areas of control, you know, we can obviously spend time studying, but actually it's hard because a lot of that is out of our control. Those decisions that have been made were not ours. And actually that's really hard because it impacts our studies, it impacts our work. And so that's a challenge. Okay, so what we do with this is by focusing on what we can control, we can improve how we feel. So think about a subject. So it might be any of the ones you just mentioned, or it might be something else. So we start by picking a subject that we're anxious about, and then focus on what you can control within that subject. So I've got an example that I've prepared for you. So, for example, we might be worrying about the impact that the coronavirus has on our children's future, or perhaps if we're thinking about our own studying, the study example, we can kind of think about this in the same way. So we can identify what's within that circle of influence. So whilst we can influence our children, we cannot control the behaviour of them in that moment or in the future. But what we can control is modelling positive coping. We can create fun memories, we can talk positively about our experiences, and we can help them to problem solve the challenges that they are facing. So what we're doing here is, rather than focusing on the future and what may or may not happen, which we can't control right now, we are spending a bit of time influencing, but most of what we're doing is within our control. Modelling positive coping, creating fun memories, talking about our experiences, problem solving. These are all things that we can do and we can control right now. And so it's much more helpful to focus on that rather than on dwelling and fearful anxiety and worry about what may or may not happen in the future. And you can do this same process with any of your worries that you might be having. So if this fear cycle has resonated with you, then the good news is that we have more planned in the next coming weeks. So look out for further webinars, and at the end of the webinar I've got the dates and the times of the different themes that we're going to be covering. So if you are interested in anxiety and fear and more information on managing worry, then we will cover that in the next few weeks. So we're going to move on now to a low mood cycle. So firstly, it's important to recognise that this is a kind of similar cycle to anxiety. It's kind of the thoughts, emotions, behaviours and the physical symptoms. So it's starting by looking at the thoughts. This is too much. I can't be bothered. These are all really natural thoughts that you may have been having over the last few months or even throughout the whole year. This is too much. I can't be bothered. I've got nothing to look forward to. I can't do anything that I love doing. And naturally, those thoughts are going to make us feel frustrated, annoyed, sad and disappointed. But the knock-on effect that has on our behaviour is that we are more likely to procrastinate or withdraw from our friends, comfort eat, drink more alcohol and not make plans. And so we're kind of withdrawing into ourselves even more because it feels safer to do that when we're feeling overwhelmed and like things are too much effort. And then naturally we're going to start to maybe have difficulty sleeping because we're not doing as much in the day, or perhaps because we're thinking about things too much at night. We may notice a lack of energy. Again, we're not doing very much, and so we're going to be struggling with that energy levels. We may find that we're not having much motivation and we've lost interest in pleasurable and enjoyable things. And so because we've experienced a loss of motivation, loss of energy, loss of interest, we're more likely to have these negative thoughts like, I can't be bothered, I've got nothing to look forward to. So that cycle starts to continue and in most cases escalate. So we start to feel even worse and even less motivated. So we can get caught in this cycle of depression where we're not doing very much and we're not motivated to do very much. And it's the same with this cycle, is that we can't directly change the way we feel. We can't stop ourselves from feeling sad or frustrated or disappointed in the situation. We can't directly stop ourselves from feeling these emotions because, as I said earlier, these emotions are a natural consequence of our thoughts, our behaviour and the situation that we're in. But what we can control is what we do and how we respond. So it's by looking at our behaviours and identifying what we're doing that's not helping us feel better. And often it's the withdrawing, the avoidance, not making plans, not doing those pleasurable things that are leading us deeper into that cycle. So what can we do about it? Well, the first step is to think about our routine. What are we doing differently now than we used to? So for many of us, lockdown has kind of disrupted our normal routine. This year has been very different to the normal routine that we're used to. Everything has changed. So it's important to recognise that a lot of this is out of our control. You know, we didn't make these decisions, we didn't make these changes ourselves, but they will have a natural impact on how we feel. And so it's thinking about what we need to do about that. It may be that you've been juggling working from home with looking after your children. It may be that you've been furloughed and actually you don't have as much to fill your time, and so you're not as busy, you don't have as much to do, and that can be a challenge in and of itself. Perhaps you're juggling too much. So putting a routine in place can help you to find a balance of activities to keep you busy if you're not as busy as usual, or to help you if you're too busy, find some time, me time, to find that time for pleasurable and enjoyable things. But also keeping you busy to stop you dwelling on things. So if you're finding you've got a lot more time to think about how bad and disappointing and rubbish things have been, you know, putting a routine in place of activities will keep your mind engaged and focus in more positive things. So a helpful tip would be to build your routine around markers such as regular meal times and a regular bedtime and wake up time. So it may be that that's completely different because of the changes that you've experienced. So maybe starting to think about, okay, well, what did I used to do? Okay, does that work for me now? Or can I tweak it a little bit? What would work for me now? And then plan in your day around that, making sure you have a balance of routine, pleasurable and necessary activities. And then once you've planned your week, follow the plan rather than being led by the way you feel, because you can see by the low mood cycle. If we follow our mood, we're more likely to avoid, procrastinate and withdraw. So that's the natural consequence of depression, but we need to break that cycle. So sticking to the plan rather than the way that we feel. I suppose it's important to recognise that some of the things we used to enjoy might not be possible right now. And often that, for many of us, that might be why we're feeling down. Things like visiting family and friends, going to the gym, going out for a meal, going shopping. These are all things that we used to find really enjoyable that we just can't do right now. And it may feel like there is no point in doing anything because you can't actually do those things that you want to do. But unfortunately, giving into this will just take us deeper into that vicious cycle. So we need to do the opposite and find a way to do those things that bring us joy. And it may be that we have to do things a little bit differently. So have a think about things that you used to do that made you happy. And then maybe have a think creatively about how you can still do some of those pleasurable things or sociable things that we used to do, but how can we do them within the limitations that we have now? It's also important to recognise that it might be hard to feel joyful straight away, especially if you haven't felt joyful in a long time. So if nothing feels joyful, then start with something small, baby steps, something really small. A small sense of achievement or enjoyment is better than nothing. So just try something different, do something a little bit differently. So does anyone have any creative ideas about finding joy in lockdown? So have a think about some of the things you've already done or perhaps would like to do within the restrictions that we are currently under, and just share with everyone maybe things you've tried that worked quite well, or something that you've been thinking about trying but maybe you haven't yet had a go at. And I think it gives us an opportunity to share creative ideas with each other, as we may feel quite stuck with these restrictions, and it may be difficult to think creatively when we're feeling low in mood. And so, yeah, please use the Q&A function to share some of those ideas with each other now. And while you do that, I'll talk you through a few that might stimulate your ideas if you haven't got any of your own. So finding joy in lockdown might mean that we need to be creative about doing some of the things that we used to do. Or perhaps it's about finding something new to do. So maybe we really can't do the things that we used to love and enjoy. So maybe it's starting a new hobby, or even reconnecting with an old hobby that we used to do many years ago that maybe we're not doing as much of now. Perhaps picking up an old musical instrument that we used to play and refocusing on that. Or maybe it's sorting through all of your old pictures and finally putting them into that photo album that you've been wanting to do for a long time. Or for me, it's putting pictures up on the walls. I have so many empty photo frames, so that's a great opportunity to use our time to look through old pictures, reminisce, and then choose the ones we love the most and put them up on our walls. And also remembering to continue to get outside and explore your local area as much as possible. Get out in the fresh air, exercise, connecting with nature. These are all fantastic ways to stay present and find joy in lockdown. When we can't do the things that we want to do, we can be easily discouraged and see obstacles rather than opportunities. But we really need to ask ourselves and push ourselves to find out how we can still get enjoyment out of this situation. Really think about what we can do, what can work within the limitations that we're in. And another, I guess, thing to think about is how we can connect socially, which is especially important for our well-being. And we may not have seen some of our friends and family members for a really long time, and we're craving those opportunities to connect, laugh and joke together. Some of us may be feeling Zoom fatigue or any other platforms, you know, with too many online meetings, pub quizzes, we just may feel a bit burnt out by it. So we may need to be thinking creatively about how we connect with our family online. Just an example that my family have done, my family quite enjoy playing board games. My brother-in-law is quite tech savvy, and so he suggested one night that we all download a particular app where we could play the same game together. So you set it up all together, and then we put a Zoom meeting on, so it felt like we were in the same room together while we played the game on our phones. So we could chat, make jokes, connect, and technology is a fantastic tool to enable us to connect with family and friends. And it makes things like playing board games on a weeknight with family members who live nearly 200 miles away possible, which is something that we wouldn't have ever thought of before. But now it's actually something that we do regularly and will continue to do regularly once these restrictions end, as it's a really great way to connect with people who we're not close to in distance, as well as because of the restrictions. So I'd like to have a look at some of your ideas now and see what you've come up with. Gardening, brilliant. And obviously, as we come into spring, this is a great time to start thinking about our gardens again. Recently joined online book reading club. Good experience so far, fantastic. Adult colouring books, lovely. Friends catch up on video messenger, getting dressed up and making an event of it, brilliant, great idea. Baking or cooking new recipes. Tried every single possible fitness class on Zoom, turned my sitting room into a mini gym, brilliant. Getting stronger and fitter as I exercise 1 hour every day. It is part of the routine I've created. And this is really important. Get a regular routine in place, you know, do it consistently, and you will see the changes it has physically, but also emotionally as well. Lockdown gives us freedom to explore local streets and going to countryside and find it something that's relaxing. Brilliant. Getting out there, exploring, having a look around, getting to know your local area. Fantastic. Listening to podcasts outside, brilliant. Bit of multitasking there. You get the podcast and you're learning something new, something uplifting, as well as maybe getting some exercise if you're on a walk, or just enjoying nature. Brilliant. Thank you for your ideas. So if you keep them coming, and if you like any of them, just give us the thumbs up. So share your appreciation with each other. Okay. So someone's already mentioned it, but exercise is one of the best things that we can do for our mental health. And, you know, if we remember back last year when we were only allowed out of the house for 1 hour a day. And there is a reason for that, and that's because it's so important for our mental health. Exercise helps to condition our body to handle stress better. It increases the amount of serotonin that our body produces, and has been found to be as effective as medication for improving our mood. It doesn't mean we have to get to the gym or wear lycra or sign up for running events. We can just go out for a walk or do something in our living room, or, you know, as someone said, try every exercise class out there until you find one that is working for you. There are so many resources online right now. So many people have put their exercise groups online, so there will be something out there. We just have to keep trying until we find the right one, or a variety if that works better for you. And I guess a final tip, if you're struggling to get going, is to try the 5-minute rule. Now, the 5-minute rule is really useful when we're struggling with motivation to do things, and this, as I said, is quite common with low mood. It's just hard to get out the door, it's hard to get moving. And so by giving ourselves this 5-minute rule, we're basically saying to ourselves, okay, I don't really want to do this, but I'm just going to do it for 5 minutes. And then after the 5 minutes, I can give myself permission to stop because I did it for the 5 minutes. And for most people, they find after 5 minutes, because they've got out the door or got going, got started, they've got over the hardest hurdle, which is getting going. And once they're going, they can keep going. So then you can say, okay, I'm going to do it for another 5 minutes and then review and see how I get on. And again, when the 5 minutes is up, you reassess. Okay, is it working for me? Am I still feeling like I don't want to do this? If so, you can stop because you've already given it a go. However, if it's feeling good and you want to keep going, then you can. So it gives yourself that option if you want to continue, but you also don't have to continue if you don't feel able to. So if this low mood cycle has resonated with you, then keep a lookout in future webinars on managing low mood, as we're going to look at this in a bit more detail and give you some more strategies and techniques to improve your mood. So some take-home messages from today's webinar is to remember that we can't control how we feel, but we can control how we respond. So we can break into those vicious cycles by looking at our behaviour, identifying what we're doing that's not working for us and doing it slightly differently. So for that fear cycle, it's looking at what is within our control rather than spending time and energy on things that we cannot change. Focus on what is within your control. Build a routine and stick to the plan, not your mood. Be creative in finding ways of doing the things that you used to do that make you happy. And remember to exercise, as it's just as effective as medication for improving mood. So what I'd like you to do now, before we come to the end of the webinar, is to choose an idea from today's webinar that you will action this week. So this is a bit of a commitment. Think about which idea works best for you. So whether it's focusing on what you can control, finding a routine, be creative in finding joy or keeping active, or maybe starting to get active. And go across to the Q&A and find the option and like that one that you're going to put into practice over this next week. And remembering this is a commitment to yourself to start to make changes to how you feel, to start breaking into that vicious cycle. And this is an example of the cycle that we talked about for both low mood and anxiety. And this is a blank one with some questions for you to have a go at yourself. So just to give you that opportunity to think about what you want to change and what you want to maybe understand what's going on for you. So if you're not sure why you're feeling the way you feel, this is a really good way of understanding it and breaking it down. Okay, before we do that, I'll tell you a bit about what's available next. I just want to have a look at what everyone's liked. So I'm going to have a look. Okay, most people have liked keeping active, but then it's kind of actually quite evenly split. Brilliant. Okay, so coming to the next sessions. So we have quite a few webinars planned over the next 6 weeks. So we've got another Managing Wellbeing one tomorrow. It's at a different time. So it is going to be the same webinar. So we're running the same webinar twice each week, once on Tuesday at 12:30 and once on Wednesday at 4 o'clock. So attend whichever one works best for you, but also let your friends and family members know. So if you found today's webinar helpful and you think your family members or friends would really benefit from what we've talked about today, then let them know. The same webinar is on tomorrow at 4. And then next week, we're going to be looking at working from home and staying well. The following week, we're going to be looking at managing worry and fear. Then the week after, so 20th of April or so, we're going to be looking at managing low mood and burnout. And then after that, we're going to be starting to look at sleep and mindfulness as well. And you can register for all of these webinars here using this link, which we're going to copy and paste into the Q&A. So you can click on that link and it will take you to register to any of these webinars. So I said at the beginning that I'll give you some more information on getting help and further information. So this webinar has hopefully been helpful for you, but it may be that you feel you need more support than what we're offering on this webinar. And so I wanted you to know where you can go for that support. So IAPT stands for Improving Access to Psychological Therapy Services, and these services are NHS funded, they're free, they're evidence-based, and they're brilliant, and they can help you with anxiety and low mood, and you can access it wherever you are. So if you think you would benefit from this, or someone you know might benefit, then we have the link here where you can type in your postcode, and it will tell you where your local IAPT service is, and you can access treatment over the telephone or online platforms, video link platforms at the moment, and that should be available to you. If you are needing urgent help for your mood, whether you're having thoughts of suicide or of harming yourself in any way, then we really do want you to seek help. Don't just struggle alone. So you can contact your GP, but if you cannot wait to see a doctor, then contact any of the following organisations. So you've got the Samaritans, which we talked about earlier. You can call them for free on 116 123. Also, Shout offers confidential 24/7 crisis text support. So if you really need to talk to someone and text works for you, then you text Shout to 85258. And then if you're not sure what support is available and what you would benefit from, then if you use this link, it will take you to the NHS urgent support guidance. So it will give you some ideas of what might be helpful for you. Also have some other useful resources and links for you here. So have a look in the slide deck, which you'll find on the Thrive London website, accompanying the recording of this webinar, and you can find any of these on there and find further support and resources. We really do value your feedback and would love to hear your thoughts about the webinar today. So we're going to copy and paste the Q&A link into the we're going to copy and paste the feedback link into the Q&A, so you can have an opportunity to tell us about how you found the webinar. And also, if you have any questions about the webinar, please post them in the Q&A now, as we will spend a few minutes going through those questions, and I'll try and answer as many as I can from today's webinar. So if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A now, and also the link to the feedback surveys there as well. And that is the end of our webinar today. So thank you so much for joining us. I really hope you found something helpful from today's webinar that you can put into practice and start to improve the way that you feel. But as I said, if either of those cycles resonated with you, we do have further webinars coming. So keep an eye out for the ones that feel relevant, or attend them all, whatever works for you, and we will be there to help. So let's come across to your questions and see if anyone's got any for us today. Okay, I've got one here. So about feeling boring, how can we manage it? Okay, so what's coming to mind here, I have kind of two ideas and thoughts. Firstly, about feeling that we are boring. How do we manage that? Or if we're bored, how do we manage that? So I'll answer both. Firstly, if we're feeling boring, that's quite a negative thought. And, you know, it's quite a common negative thought that many of us may have. And what we can find with negative thoughts is that they're often not very helpful and also not very accurate. You know, when we have these negative thoughts about ourselves, we assume that they're fact when they're not. So first of all, it's to actually reassess if that's true. You know, it's probably not true. You know, most of us have a lot that isn't boring about us, a lot of interesting things that we have about ourselves, whether it's our hobbies and interests, or whether it's where we're from, or whether it's our work. You know, we have a lot going on, but we don't necessarily focus on them. And one of the things that we can struggle with when we have depression is a negative filter, where we only focus on the negative and we dismiss the positive things in our lives. And so we kind of don't recognize all the positive things about ourselves and we only focus on the negative. So starting by paying more attention to the positive things about ourselves is a good start. But if we really do feel that we're boring, then maybe starting to think, okay, well, what would be interesting? What can I do differently that might make me more interesting to myself? And yeah, exactly. And it may be that because of the last year, we may feel we're boring because there's not much we can do. So it's coming back to those things that we're maybe struggling with, that maybe not doing very much, or maybe we're not doing those things that we used to enjoy, that we used to find pleasurable. So it's re-engaging in those things again, finding meaning and enjoyment from them, and that will make us feel less boring and make us feel more interesting if we've got things to talk about again. So hopefully that's helped. As I said, we're going to talk a bit more about low mood in future webinars, so we may cover this in a bit more detail because we'll have the whole webinar rather than splitting it for more general well-being. But hopefully that's been helpful. And we've got one more question here that I think we've got time to answer it. So any ideas for maintaining communication via social media without getting into the endless cycle of constantly checking COVID, Brexit news and reading all the comments attached to those news items? Oh, this is a tricky one, isn't it? Because obviously, whenever we look on our phone, there's notifications. So I think firstly, turn off the notifications, and also scheduling. I know this sounds a bit kind of unnatural, but scheduling when you're going to look at your phone, for example. So I have a good example. When you have email alerts on my emails, and I initially found when I had that on, when I was working, I'd get the alert that I'd had an email and it would distract me from the work that I was doing, and my attention would get drawn to my emails. But I found that I was being less productive and effective because every time my attention was taken away from what I was focusing on. And so instead I turned the notification off and I scheduled in some time each day, a couple of times, where I could, look through my emails rather than it just being a free-for-all. That way you're containing that, I guess, time to specific times, and it doesn't kind of encroach on the rest of your day. So turn off the notifications and limit the amount of time that you're on those types of apps. I think there's settings on your phone where you can do this as well, so maybe have a look into that, where you can turn off certain things and leave. I'm really sorry, but I can't remember how to do it. It was a while ago when I did it. So you can turn off certain apps but leave certain apps still on, and that should help with that. But hopefully that's helpful. Okay, well, we have come to the end now. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks for your questions and thank you for engaging with the webinar. Really hope it's been helpful, and good luck, and hopefully we'll see you again at future webinars. Take care.